And welcome to a Climate Conversation podcast. This is a podcast series that's been created to be a complement to a climate conversation documentary, which is the vision and project of Walt Johnson. He and his wife decided to take money out of their own retirement account so that he could create this documentary to have a conversation about this whole narrative that is out there regarding climate. And then we decided to create this amazing podcast series with renowned scientists and experts. And so we're very excited to bring to you today's Climate Conversation podcast. And it's great to have with us, first of all, the creator, and that is Walt Johnson. Walt, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you who have made this such a good project.
It is quite the project, and I am learning so much. And Dave O'Rourke, our spokesman for a climate conversation, this has been quite the journey for you as well.
It's been a wonderful journey. I've met people I never would otherwise have met, learned things that have been, banned by Google that I'm awfully glad I know before I put a couple of $100 trillion of debt on my children and grandchildren without really understanding the purpose of it. I've got a much better understanding of it now.
Well, and it's so important that we have these great conversations about this. And our guest today is Steve Goreham, and he's the executive director of the Climate Science Coalition of America and author of 4 books on energy, climate change, and sustainable development with over 100,000 copies in print. Steve's new book is Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure, and it was once again #1 on Amazon's energy policy category. Steve Goreham, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Hi, Kim. Great to join you. And Dave and Walt, great to join you today for a discussion.
Well, it's an important discussion. And Dave O'Rourke, why don't you start us off with, where should we start?
Well, I was in traffic the other day, and I was very frustrated because it took me a lot longer to get where I was going. And then I realized it was explained to me that was climate change that caused my traffic delay. And I recently also found out that my hair loss, which has begun, in earnest, is also a function of climate change. There's nothing in our environment, nothing environmental in our environment that doesn't immediately get laid at the foot of climate change. Any disaster is every disaster. And so a principal focus of what we're happy to have Steve here to talk about today is these recent hurricanes. And so, if you don't mind, I've made some notes, so occasionally I'll be looking over at my notes. Hurricane Milton, which I remember when hurricanes were exclusively named after women, but Hurricane Milton, Helene, Francine, and Beryl have hit the southern United States this year. Is this because of human cause? Is this anthropocentric climate change? Is that what's happening?
Well, Dave, I think maybe one of the biggest successes of climatism, as I call it, the fear of man-made global warming, has been the ability to attribute every natural disaster, every storm, every drought, every flood to human greenhouse gas emissions. And this has been a big year for hurricanes. We've had 5 of them that have come ashore in the south. Hurricane Beryl came ashore in June. It was a Category 1 that hit Texas. In August, Hurricane Debbie came ashore in the Big Bend area of Florida, another Category 1. We had Hurricane Francine make landfall in Louisiana September 11th, a Category 2 storm. And then Hurricane Helene hit the Big Bend area of Florida, a Category 4 storm, the biggest of the year, and it flooded much of the southeast U.S. And finally, Hurricane Milton, just a couple weeks ago, came ashore at Florida as a Category 3. I was actually down. I was going to make a presentation to a group on Marco Island. And I arrived there Saturday morning, and I met the director of the conference. And that night, Saturday night, they canceled the conference because hurricane was coming in. And so we have the news media, of course, ringing with all of these and talking about how these are all caused by your neighbor's sport utility vehicle. But this has happened before. since 1900, and you can probably go to the next slide there, since 1900, we've had 199 hurricanes make U.S. landfall. 64 of those were Category 3 or stronger, like Milton or Helene. And we've also had now 28 years when we've had 3 or more hurricanes make landfall in the United States. And many of these were before any sort of human emissions. If you look at human carbon dioxide emissions, pretty much after World War II is when they started in any quantity. But we've had hurricanes way back in the 1800s, 1900s. It's a very natural phenomenon.
Well, so we had not just a hurricane, but we had very significant flooding still going on. It's still a mess in the Asheville area in Western North Carolina, a beautiful part of the country. It's not the first time that they've been flooded or hit by a hurricane, but is flooding abnormal? Is there something about the flooding that's new or different, or that we can lay at the foot of the sun monster?
Just a terrible thing in North Carolina. If you've seen the pictures, and everyone has who's watched the news media, Hurricane Helene came right up and kind of parked over the Appalachians by Asheville, Western North Carolina, and just flooded the place. Dozens of inches of rain. The French Broad River overflowed. But again, this has happened before. They actually had a flood back in 1916, which was up until this point called the biggest flood in North Carolina. And what happened in 1916 was they had 2 different hurricanes that came up. And these were both unnamed. One came up through Mississippi and came over to Western North Carolina, and another one came up from South Carolina. And these were 9 days apart. And they both, again, hit the Appalachians near Nashville. And if you put up that, have you put up that next slide yet? Yeah. No, not that one. Go back. So that previous slide shows the flooding that occurred in 1916. So again, this is a case, and this is long before human emissions. This is a case of what nature does. It's, it can be very, very tough on our cities and towns and everything else. But again, this is not caused by people eating meat or any of the other kind of warnings that are coming from man-made global warming. By the way, go ahead.
Well, I have a question because there are people that have said that, and I don't know that much about hurricanes, but normally when hurricanes get to land, that they start to lose some of their umph, if you will. But there are those that say that Helene continued to be very destructive, as if when it was on the water as well. Is there any credence to that?
Well, this happens, and it all hurricanes lose wind speed when they come ashore, but they're big low areas, and they can park and they can do a lot of flooding. Actually, the storm that supposedly killed, at least what they record, the most people in history in the United States was Hurricane Sandy that came ashore in New Jersey. I think it was about 2010 or 2012. It wasn't even a hurricane when it came ashore. It was a tropical storm, but it flooded many, many areas, New York City and New Jersey and many others. So these storms can have a big effect on flooding, even if the wind speeds are down below hurricane strength. By the way, one of the things that the Biden administration and many of the eastern states are trying to do is build offshore wind. We have Massachusetts and Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Virginia, all trying to build offshore wind turbines. And if you remember, just earlier this year, we had a single blade or blade or two of one turbine fly apart in Massachusetts, wash up on the beaches, and everybody was complaining. But they're putting up dozens of these wind turbines now along the East Coast, and if you look at that one chart, it shows all of the storm track. 6 hurricanes, 51 tropical storms that have come through that area, and also there's a little image of Puerto Rico. where a bunch of hurricanes were damaged in 2018. All the blades were torn down. This is very, very high risk. We're going to have, I'm afraid to say that we're going to have these storms come through and tear up these wind turbines.
So, Walt, it's not just the wind. We've on previous podcasts have talked about what's happened to the I think it's called a right whale. I have a hard time saying right whale for some reason, but the right whale population off of New England has suffered some losses. And that has to do something, I believe, with a lack of any sort of environmental impact analysis or forethought about these things.
Yes, even Patrick Moore, our first podcast, commented that everyone knows that the right whale migrates through there. And we've killed off about half of the right whale population, which is an endangered species, and nobody says anything. The environmental impact statement was a scam that was done on that. I was alive when the North Slope pipeline, I was up there working and saw what all they went through to ensure that the North Slope pipeline did not influence the migration of the caribou. And the right whale, they've done no work at all. Nobody knows why they're dying. It could be the low frequency signals that the right whales and the windmills both give out. It might be the windmills have chased away the krill that the right whales eat. Or maybe it's all the mud that's made in the water when they put the foundations in for the windmills. Nobody knows all of this. No one thinks about it. No one cares.
Now, there's also an issue about the sonar ranging that they're using to map the floor in the area where they put in the wind turbines. And sonar is something the whales use too, so it may be interfering with what they do. I've seen this firsthand. My wife and I have we spend part-time of the year on the ocean front of Virginia Beach. We have a condo down there, and we've seen a couple whales wash up right there. It's really, really kind of a sad situation. But every energy source has environmental impact, and the idea that wind and solar have no impacts is just wrong.
Well, let me take that quick moment now to interject that in the podcast series, we've had guests that have discussed the environmental impact of I don't know what the right word is this, but there's no recycling plan. There's no known or systematic or safe way to handle used solar panels or wind turbine parts. They go to landfills. Once a solar panel is exposed to soil, you'll never grow another crop in that area.
Back to Milton one more time. A tornado came off of Milton and went through a solar farm. The information is just leaking out now about it. It's just cut this giant path right through the solar farm. And everyone says, well, they got to go out and rake up all the glass there because that glass will have cadmium in it. But my wife says, look, that glass went not just there, it's all over the place. So we don't know what we've done with that.
Well, you're right, and the frequency of these things is increasing. We have these solar fields take a lot of land area, about 100 times the land area for the same output as a coal or a natural gas or a nuclear plant. And so when you build these things on a lot area land, you have a high probability of them being destroyed. As you mentioned, tornadoes just destroyed a solar field in Florida. Last summer in Nebraska, we had a 14,000 solar panel system that had just been put up 2 years earlier that was destroyed by hail. Same thing in March in Texas this year, another big solar field destroyed by hail. And we're going to see more and more of this. These wind and solar systems are not very resilient when it comes to strong weather.
Now, in addition to, let me introduce a new topic here. I think you have some information on. I'd love to hear about this one. So I'm old enough, and and Walt is old enough to remember the cover of Newsweek magazine that predicted the coming ice age that led to the whole concept of climate change that became, climate warming, and then came back. It was global cooling, and then it was global warming, and now it's climate change. So you can cover all bases. You want to make sure that industry gets that. But as Kim likes to say, the green in the Green New Deal is money. So I'm hearing or reading that there's the prediction of that the jet stream of the Atlantic will collapse sometime in the next couple of decades. That can't be a good thing. Predictions are without that jet stream, we have another ice age.
Yeah, well, you mean the Gulf Stream, right? The Gulf Stream
Is part.
is the warm water current that goes from the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, flows up along the east coast of the United States and then out into the Atlantic and over to Europe, where it warms the nations of Europe. Yeah, there was just a letter written by 44 scientists to the environmental ministry in Norway, and they're warning that this Gulf Stream current may be on the brink of failure, which would be a big change. Now the Daily Mail said that this is going to happen next year. That was a bit of an exaggeration. The 44 scientists actually said it was very possible during the next several decades. And so they urge that we should all follow the Paris Climate Agreement. And if we do that, then the Gulf Stream won't collapse. By the way, some of the notable folks there were Michael Mann signed this letter, and Stefan Ramsdorf of Germany as well. Now the Gulf Stream is part of a bigger current circulating that's called the meridional overturning circulation, which is also called the thermohaline circulation. There's a huge current, and when it's in the Atlantic, it flows north toward Iceland, then the water sinks, and then it goes south all the way down past South America and all over the earth. And some say it takes hundreds of years for a single circulation. It's the biggest flywheel on Earth, if you will. But again, all of these things say that our warming, this letter says that our warming is causing this. And then you have to kind of scratch your head and say, okay, well, why is today's warming going to cause this? Why haven't we seen it in the past?
Point.
Because, as I point out to many people, today's climate is not historically warm. You can go to the next slide. Then the next slide shows temperature data from ice core proxies in Greenland over the last 10,000 years, since the last ice age or so. And you see that temperatures warm and cool and warm and cool. We have a warm period called the medieval ice age, the medieval warm period when the Vikings settled southwest Greenland. We had a period called the Little Ice Age when it was cool in Europe 400 or 500 years ago, and then our modern warm period. But the data shows that we have had multi-century long periods when it's been warmer than today. And if the Gulf Stream were going to collapse, we would have seen it during one of these past periods when it was warmer than today, but that has not been the case.
Well, let me just go back for a quick second to a comment that you made a moment ago about the 44 scientists who sound to me like they have all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation, but that's neither here nor there. If we'll just follow the IPCC, what? This won't happen? So one of the themes that we pursue in this podcast and in the documentary, A Climate Conversation, is the idea of all of these proposed solutions are enormously costly. Not a little bit of cost, but a game-changingly enormously expensive. And we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to get in return for that investment? So if we spent and in the film of Walt, I think Ken Gregory came up with a projection of around $200 trillion to go to net zero by 2020. But the impact of that money spending, as far as we know, would be completely negligible. What were the numbers on that, Walt?
The best number was Lord Monckton, and he had 0.1 degrees Celsius would be the reduction in temperature.
And I think it was,
Zero.
and I think that was net zero by 2050, right?
Yeah,
That what it was?
that's right.
Right.
Yep.
Net zero carbon dioxide.
So we have these proposed solutions, and some of them aren't just proposed. Some of them, EV mandates, offshore wind turbines, 14,000 panels, solar implementations in the upper Midwest. So these things are real money, has already been spent and is being committed, and much, much more is on offer here. In your opinion, Steve, is it going to buy anything? Can we make a change?
Well, I have to agree with Lord Monckton. And by the way, the world spent about $1.8 trillion last year on renewables, and they want to spend much, much more each year. The problem is that, or the reality is that Earth's climate is dominated by nature, not man-made emissions. If you break down the greenhouse effect, the first thing you'll learn, and by the way, the greenhouse effect, the capture of outgoing infrared radiation is what's blamed on dangerous global warming. But if you break down the greenhouse effect, the first thing that you find is that Earth's dominant greenhouse gas isn't carbon dioxide, it isn't methane, it's water vapor. Somewhere between 70 and 90% of Earth's greenhouse effect is due to water vapor in clouds. And then if you look at the last quarter of the greenhouse effect, you find that most of the carbon dioxide that goes in the atmosphere comes from nature, comes out of the oceans, comes out of the biosphere. And when you roll that all together, you find out that human industry is responsible for only about 1 or 2% of Earth's greenhouse effect. Very, very small. And that probably means if we spend these hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, we're probably not going to see any effect on global temperatures. It's going to be negligible. So the solutions really are ridiculous by the climatist movement. And the only sensible procedure is to adapt to climate as we have been for all of Earth's history.
One of the key points, one of my favorite points in the film is the idea that we can argue climate solutions and we can discuss economics and we can spend money or not spend money. But at the end of the day, we should shepherd our Earth. This is a treasure that we've been given, and it is a responsibility to take care of it. One wonders what could be done for future generations in terms of clean water and clean air and plentiful food and human flourishing if we diverted some of these resources we're talking about spending to those kinds of things that are pro-humanity. It's one of the reasons I'm so drawn to this film and to the work that Walt has done and to the previous podcast series that we've laid down here as we brought together people who are actually pro-people. You would think there'd be more pro-people than there are. And in your work, you must come across on a daily basis an enormous number of people who are not so pro-human.
Well, I think they're misguided, but you're right. The thing we should be doing is reducing real pollution, particulates, ozone, nitrous oxides, sulfur oxides, and the wealthy part of the world is doing a great job to do that. We have an issue with about 80% of the world's wastewater today is discharged untreated into rivers, lakes, and streams. That's not much in the U.S. or Europe, but if you remember 7-8 years ago, we had the Olympics down in Brazil, and the swimmers didn't want to swim in the water down there. Brazil's just building their first water treatment plants. Plastics in the ocean is another issue, sometimes overstated, but we have about 100 million tons of plastics in the ocean. We're averaging about adding about 10 million tons a year. We really need biodegradable plastics. By the way, if your viewers go to if they Google and they put in India and garbage and river, they could see these videos of trucks full of garbage that back up to a bridge in India and just dump the garbage over the side into the river. And it's not just one truck; it's truck after truck after truck, and the garbage just goes out into the ocean. That is something that needs to be solved, and we should quit messing around with carbon dioxide, which shouldn't even be called a pollutant.
See, this is the thing
If I
about
could jump in,
insulation. Sorry, Walt. That was
if I could jump in here, more recently, the Paris Olympics, there were swimmers that refused to get into the water also.
of the Seine, of the beautiful Seine, which I'm
Right.
everyone here has walked along, with one of the most beautiful places, urban, cityscapes in the world. Can't go in the water. That seems like something we could pay attention to or devote some resources to. But that's the thing about being canceled. That's the thing about being effectively shunned in the media, that they're so difficult to break through this conversation. It takes a rare individual with some real grit to make a movie. I want to encourage everybody watching this to stay with our podcast program, watch the past episodes, get involved, share this information with others, and by all means, make sure they know how to find the documentary, because that is a 1 hour that can be spent extraordinarily well, because it can not only impart some really, really powerful information to people, it can change the way that they feel. And they can go from canceled and sad, or confused and concerned, to optimistic and hopeful. And then they can add their voice to this conversation. And that is the only thing that's going to solve this problem. This is going to have to be a bottom up fight for the people who want to bring some realism to this conversation, and maybe who want to save the whales, if we can say that.
So, Steve, I have a question regarding these hurricanes. And when we see the devastation on our phone or our computer or our television, and see the people hurting and losing their homes and loss of life, it's heartbreaking. But I've also heard this tearing down of the West, of people thriving and prospering, everyday people thriving and prospering. But the West, the United States, my understanding is because of the things that we do regarding building strong buildings and getting people prepared for these storms, that the loss of life is not nearly as great as it had been historically. Please speak to that.
Yeah, that's correct. I think there's a database you can go to. I think it's called IDAT, the International Disaster Database, which points out that deaths from disasters have been declining over the last century, and they're down quite a bit by a factor of just about 10 times, more than 10 times. And a lot of that is because, as you say, we're building stronger buildings. People have learned to adapt to the climate. Again, really the only sensible course is adapting to the climate. If you want to adapt to rising oceans, driving electric vehicles is not going to do it. It's what Netherlands has done for centuries, building seawalls, building islands to adapt to rising seas. If you want to adapt to hurricanes in the Caribbean, the way to do it is to build very strong structures, concrete structures that can withstand the winds, and that reduces loss of life and reduces damage. We have about 40% of the people in Africa today that don't even own a fan, and temperatures in the summer average about 95 degrees are the highs every day. And so we need to get low-cost electricity to those people, modern fuels to heat and cool, air conditioning, those sorts of things. Those are the things that improve life, reduce loss of life, not trying to restrict carbon dioxide emissions.
That is a theme that, so if I could, Kim, that is a theme that has come up again and again and again. We talk about climate change and catastrophe. We should be talking about energy poverty, I think. There are billions of people who don't have enough energy. The theft of energy, we had Robert Bryce on. He'd done some important work. He made a film called Juice and showed that more than 25% of the energy produced in India is stolen. If you look at any telephone pole, there's a billion wires that have been jury-rigged on there, so people are stealing the energy. Energy poverty is a big deal, yet the International Energy Agency has called for the elimination of all fossil fuels. I believe that's true. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, why don't you drop down to the slide? I'm going to read a quote. It's about the third or fourth down from where you are. A quote by Fatih Birol, the executive director of the International Energy Agency. He said, if governments are serious about the climate crisis, there can be no new investments in oil, gas, and coal from this year. Just an astonishing statement. Mr. Birol, I'm sure, has a smartphone, which is made from hydrocarbons, natural gas materials. In the image, he's wearing a suit and a tie. He probably has shoes on. All those things come from hydrocarbons. But it's not only our smartphones and clothing. It is our medicines. It is our medical supplies. All of our vehicles, about 95% of the world's vehicle fuel still is either from petroleum or natural gas. So our ships, planes, trains, and other vehicles all run on those things, and they're manufactured on hydrocarbons. We have plastics everywhere. We use about 20 times as much plastic in the wealthy nations as in the developing nations, but they are adding plastics as well. And then about half of the world's food is produced with synthetic fertilizer, which is manufactured with natural gas or in China with coal. And we have about 100 million tractors also that run diesel fuel. So our world is dependent on hydrocarbons. Next slide. Or about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is from all of the climate agencies of the world. They all agree on that. And not only that, warm temperatures are better for people. We can talk about that as we go forward. But so now the world has spent over $5 trillion since 2004 on renewables, with the idea that we need to change away from oil, gas, and coal. But if you look at the actual world energy consumption, and by the way, the world formed the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the United Nations. 46, actually was almost 200 nations signed the Kyoto Protocol Climate Treaty in 1996. We have a international climate conference every year. There have been about 25 of those. And we've had over 300,000 wind turbines installed. But in 2021, coal, oil, and gas, hydrocarbons still provided 81% of world energy, the same as in 1999. So despite all this spending, hydrocarbons continue to dominate, and they're going to dominate for many years to come.
So I have a question. It seems that one word that is just another one of these words that you're not allowed to say anymore, nuclear energy, does appear to be making something of a comeback. And where I live in California, we're deciding not to close nuclear plants. And I hear that this is happening also in Western Europe and other places. And what do you call water-based energy, hydro something, hydroelectric energy? Do you think that if we diverted resources to nuclear and hydroelectric energy, that this would be a good use of investment?
I think hydro is a little bit limited. You need a big elevation. You need a river. Many of the best hydro spots are already dammed up. Nuclear we could build more of. Actually, globally, nuclear has been declining for a while. But as you say, in California, they're extending the life of the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant. And what's going on right now is we have a artificial intelligence revolution. Within just the last 2 years, when GPT came out, we have all of the big guys, Microsoft and Amazon and Google, Meta, Oracle, and others that are decided to build all these data centers to do AI. And they've realized that wind and solar aren't going to cut it for them. And so they all want to get nuclear electricity. Amazon bought a data center right next to a nuclear plant in Pennsylvania to do that. Microsoft has a contract. They're going to try and reopen the 3 Mile Island plant in Pennsylvania. There's a plant, the Palisades plant in Michigan is being restarted. So there is a lot of effort to produce more electricity because our demand is rising very fast in the U.S. now to do artificial intelligence. Nuclear is okay, but it's much more expensive than natural gas, for example. And what we really need is we need some cost breakthroughs with nuclear power. We need to get the cost much, much lower, down to the level that natural gas provides today. If we can do that, if we can get these technological breakthroughs, a nuclear can resurge again.
Now, if we do have a low cost, relatively low cost source of energy all around the world. It's a significant percentage of global energy, coal. And John Kerry, our climate envoy, has called for a worldwide ban on coal. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, John Kerry said we should not allow a coal-fired power plant anywhere in the world. Just, again, an astonishing statement. Next slide. There are 6,550 coal-fired power plants operating around the world. Another 1,000 in planning or construction. In the U.S., we get about 16% of our electricity from coal, but in China, it's as high as 60%. Coal now provides 35% of world electricity. It is the biggest source of electricity in the world, yet we still have a tremendous shortage of electricity. We have 700 million people that don't have access to electricity around the world. We have another 2 billion people that have blackouts or brownouts every single day, if you can imagine that. Next slide.
Well, hey, just a quick question before you move on,
Sure.
because you had mentioned something, Dave, about, go back to the previous slide, please. And that is energy poverty. Look at Africa. There's hardly any coal-fired plants there.
Nope, there aren't. And Central Africa's, we have there's about 1 billion people on the continent of Africa, and 40% of them don't have electricity.
Boy, that slide really shows what you're talking about. That's important.
So when I present to groups, I say, do you have an air conditioner? Because that one appliance uses more electricity than the average person around the world gets to, than a third of the world's people get to use in a given day. We have about 2 or 3 billion people that don't allow that. So Mr. Kerry's statement that we should get rid of all coal-fired power plants, I like to compare that to Marie Antoinette, who said, well, if the poor people don't have food, let them eat cake. I mean, it's just an astonishingly crazy statement. We need to get electricity to all the people of the world and help them to boost their standard of living by so doing.
That's the compassionate thing to do.
Well, it would be remiss not to at least acknowledge that we live in America. We're Americans. We consume a wonderfully calorie-rich diet. It's not just calorie-rich, it's varied and infinitely variable and wonderfully tasty. I understand the World Health Organization has proposed a global ban on the consumption of meat and dairy products.
Yeah, I was astonished by this. This was earlier this year. This statement was made, and I'm not sure I can pronounce the gentleman's name, the head of the United Nations Health Agency, Tedros Ahanom, I think his name is. But, I said, okay, so did he propose this for 2050? No. Did he propose a global ban on meat and dairy for 2040? No, he said next year, 2025. He wants a global ban on the consumption of meat and dairy products. Again, and just an astonishingly crazy statement. If you look at the trends, meat consumption is rising in every nation in the world except India. Really, global meat consumption has been, for example, it's up by a factor of 4 since 1960 in Brazil. The consumption of meat is up by a factor of 5 in Japan since 1960. The average person in China is eating 16 times more meat and seafood than they were in 1960. And the bottom line is, as nations get wealthier, they start eating more meat and dairy products, and they eat less pulses and beans and peas. That's just the way things are. And so, again, just a crazy statement by the United Nations.
Well, and Steve, meat is a very dense protein source, and it's good for you. It makes you stronger. It makes you, and people should have the choice on what they want to eat, but they shouldn't have that choice taken away. And we talked about the Paris Olympics earlier in the podcast. My understanding is that the people organizing the Paris Olympics had decided they were going to try to have more of a plant-based diet for the athletes. The athletes ended up demanding more meat and protein because they needed that so that they could perform at their optimum levels.
Yep, they do. So, yeah, and the United Nations has a solution. They want people to eat insects to fight world hunger. A statement from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, quote, insects are reported to emit less greenhouse gases and less ammonia than cattle or pigs, and they require significantly less land or water than cattle rearing. Some people have taken this to heart now. There's a Utah school where a teacher was giving insects to, I think it was junior high kids, next slide, and to eat in class. And this was just last year, this was reported, and it said, quote, there's only one right answer to this essay, and it said Americans should be eating bugs, the teacher said. These things sound amusing, but they're really kind of, again, everything, your diet, your food, your clothing has to be controlled by global warming. And then, by the way, these are both sidebars out of my latest book, Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure. I have about 150 sidebars in that with all the crazy things about energy and about climate. And then we have this Swedish scientist who advocates eating humans to combat climate change. And he would give lectures, and after his presentation, he would ask the audience, how many people, raise your hand, would like to try human flesh? So I don't know. It's, again, another really misguided thing. And these people seem to think if we do this, that the oceans will stop rising, which is just loony stuff.
Well, Steve, Soylent Green is people. It's rare that.
It's a movie.
All of that era of Charlton Heston movies, Planet of the Apes, all of those movies back then, he made some gems. So I hate to bring this up. I hate to bring this person up because she just will not go away. It's America's original bad penny, Hillary Clinton, in the news again. That's my personal opinion. I'm sorry if I offended anybody. I certainly didn't mean to do that. I'm just having a little fun in podcast land. But she has called for us to track climate deaths. Any sense in doing that?
Well, if you remember, this was end of last year. She asked for this, and I think she was doing a takeoff on the COVID age. If you remember, you could daily look online and see all the deaths from COVID-19. You could see by city and nation and country, and so she'd like to do the same thing with climate. She had pointed out that there were 61,000 deaths in Europe from a heat wave the year before. And this would really get visibility if we were able to track climate deaths. Again, the problem with this is there are many, many problems. As we talked about the MDAD database earlier, the number of deaths from disaster and therefore climate have been declining for more than a century. And even beyond that, when I present to groups, I like to ask the audiences, so which do you think is more dangerous for people, cold weather or warm weather? And most people get it right. They say cold weather is more dangerous. And indeed, if you look at the flu season, our flu season in the Northern Hemisphere is about October to March during the cold months. In the Southern Hemisphere, it's from June to September. They're cold months. If you look at COVID deaths, and for most nations, more people contracted COVID and died during the cold months. More people get sick during the cold weather. And there have been many, many studies. I don't know if you put up my next slide there, a study by Falagas who looked at temperature-related deaths in 10 different countries. Yeah, go back one. You had it up there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And he found that in every country, more people died during cold weather than warm weather. So we've had a number of people point out, like Bjorn Lomborg, that if it warms a little bit, we'll have many, many fewer deaths than in the other case. And then I also like to say, well, where do people retire, right? They go to Alaska and Saskatchewan and Nova Scotia. No, they all go to Florida and Texas and Arizona. Don't they know that warm climates are dangerous, as our own government tells us? Very, very foolish.
Great point.
We had a recent geologist, a guest on our podcast, Lonnie Kennedy, had a chart with a very positive correlation between eating ice cream and drowning. And I mean, if you look at the chart, it's, been in the finance industry in my life, but I know correlations when I see them. But it turns out that people swim in the ocean when it's warm, and that's also when they eat ice cream. So did the ice cream cause the drowning? No, we may never know. But we're seeing all kinds of interesting ideas. Now, in your book, you said we're headed for a green breakdown. Can you help us understand what you mean by that? I think that might be the title of your book.
Yeah, I think this is going to be driven. You talked about how do we get people to get over to something more sensible, and I think the economics are going to force that. The world is striving to get to net zero by 2050, to get rid of coal, oil, natural gas, adopt wind, solar, and biofuels. But this is beyond a reach out goal. This is an impossibility. It is not going to happen. And what more and more green energy means is higher energy prices. It means electricity blackouts as we put in more intermittent wind and solar. It means less freedom because governments are going to try and take away your gasoline car and your gas appliances. And it means transnational energy shocks like they had in Europe over the last 2 years. People are going to demand a return to low-cost, reliable energy. And Green Breakdown talks about that. It's a complete discussion from power plants to home appliances to electric vehicles to heavy transportation, heavy industry. And this is not going to occur. And we're already seeing signs of the breakdown coming.
So are we seeing this regionally? Where are we seeing, well, for example, low cost is the important thing here, but lots of the United States is experiencing much higher utility bills, much higher electricity bills than before. What do we know about that?
Well, in the U.S., California is the number one example. Electricity prices in California have increased 50% in the last 3 years.
Wow.
And now if you run an air conditioner in July or August in a medium-sized house, you get an electricity bill of $1,000 for a month. I mean, it's very, very high, and it's going to go much, much higher, and people are going to revolt, I think. I'm not sure what form the utility revolt is going to be, but it's going to be something. Now, you also put up one of my favorite charts there. This is prices in Europe, and I've been plotting this for 7 or 8 years. And on the vertical axis is the wind and solar capacity of a nation. That's the watts per person in a nation. That basically shows you how much wind and solar they have. And on the horizontal axis is the residential electricity price in a nation. Now, if wind and solar are the cheapest, then the nations that use the most wind and solar would have the lowest electricity prices, right? But we see the exact opposite. we see a curve trending up to the right. And for example, Spain's prices are twice the United States price. And Denmark, with all their wind turbines, is 3 times the U.S. price. So renewables are more costly in Europe. It's clear that that's the case. And we also see that in the U.S. and a number of factors as well. Despite the headlines, you see these headlines, we have wind and solar, the cheapest form of electricity, but not when they're deployed, and you have to build transmission, and you have to account for intermittency.
So you mentioned where, my state, or I've really loved living here for 50 years, but it is a controversial place, and sometimes it's hard to figure out why we do the things we do, and why we have a thing called PSPS in Northern California, where PG&E is the utility, and it's a power interruption. Well, this never happened when in the many, many years I lived here until a couple of years ago. We have blackouts in the richest area on earth. Well, your book predicts that we're going to have more of this.
Well, you are going to have more. And, one of the things they're doing in California is they want to put in wind and solar. So again, if you compare the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant to something like the Ivanpah solar facility, the Ivanpah solar facility requires roughly 20 to 100 times the land area of the nuclear power plant. So what does that mean? You have to put these solar facilities all over the state, and then you have to run transmission to them. And one of the reasons they're having fires is these transmission towers are causing fires to occur. So, okay, let's double and triple the amount of transmission we have out there. And so what you're going to have is more fires, and you're going to have more outages. And it's really a sad situation.
Well, and Steve, also with these transmission lines, my understanding is it depends on different corridors, but it's somewhat of a land grab as well, as far as the easements that they're requiring for these transmission lines across the middle part of the United States.
Yeah, they want to use the eminent domain to take land away from people, not only for transmission lines, but also for carbon dioxide pipelines. That's a new thing. There's a battle going on in the Midwest over that. But anyway, the second thing is power blackouts as part of the green green transition here. And you've put up a graph. Back in this is data from the Energy Information Administration, or the U.S. Department of Energy. Back about 10 years ago, the average electricity ratepayer was experiencing an outage of about 3.5 hours a year. Now that is running 5, 6, and 7 hours a year a decade later. And it's continuing to rise. The more intermittent wind and solar we put in, the more of these outages we're going to have.
Well, so you're describing what are effectively costs. The land use costs, Kim mentioned, the what happens to interruptions to business and enterprises and just people when we have a blackout and everything. But there's the biggest cost of all, which is our freedom.
Well,
Can you? I think in your book you mentioned that all of this, the electrification of everything, can lead to a loss of freedom, and that seems like something that must be discussed.
yeah. Okay. So go 2 slides down. So yeah, that is a big deal. And right now, governments and the climatism movement are saying, hey, we got to get rid of electric vehicles. We now have 22 states which are mandating that all sales of cars in their states have to be electric by about 2035. So that's a big push. They want to take away your gasoline car. And by the way, people are saying, we don't really want these. We don't want to put up with having to charge them. We don't want to push up with weather issues. We don't want to have to put up with insurance being 70% higher. There's a bunch of issues. And then the other thing is they want to take away your gas furnace and your gas stove. And boy, if you're in a northern state, that's a real disadvantage. It's going to be more expensive, much more expensive. If you're down in Florida or South Carolina, maybe that's not a big deal to go to a heat pump. But again, I'm not against any of these electric devices. The problem is thinking that if we force everybody to shift these, we're going to make the storms less severe. That's modern superstition. It's not going to happen in any case.
Well, there's a trade-off. I mean, if AI is potentially a tremendous benefit for human flourishing, and you can easily see how it could be in mapping the genome and in breakthroughs in healthcare and longevity and achieving, longevity, escape velocity, you name it. AI holds tremendous potential, but it doesn't appear that you can simultaneously support the demand for energy that's embedded in AI and the electrification of vehicles. Right now,
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. So
Right, that's another big factor that's going to cause a green breakdown, this push for AI. We don't have enough power. We're going to have to stop. And already we're seeing that coal plants are being extended, 2 in Utah, 2 in, I believe it was Colorado, that are being extended, in West Virginia, in Tennessee. These coal plants are being extended, as well as the nuclear plants. And so the environmental movement is going to be wailing and gnashing their teeth because we're not shutting down coal plants and we're not shutting down natural gas plants. Just another reason why this green breakdown is going to occur.
well, where can our listeners get a hold of your book or any of your books?
Yeah, they can go to my website, Steve Goreham, GORDHAM.com, and I'll send them signed copies. I have 4 books, in addition to Green Breakdown. Another one that's great for your kids or your grandkids. They're in 8th grade or up in school. Is called The Mad, Mad, Mad World of Climatism. And we're getting a very one-sided story in school today. So this book will give them a more balanced position on the climate.
But I want to encourage everyone to spend some time with your library and get this material. I mean, I know personally from experience that these books are fun to read too. You're a good writer. This is going to be it's not a slog, but it's important information that can be delivered in a way that you want to take it in. In the same way you're wonderfully well spoken and thoughtful on our podcast, the books deliver information in a similar way. I want to encourage everyone. Is there one they should start with, or do you think they should start with Green Breakdown, or what's your?
Well, there are 4 of them. The first one is Climatism, which it's a hardcover, 400 pages, gives the complete story of the United Nations, computer modelers, attacks on scientists. Then the next 3 are color paperbacks with all those sarcastic sidebars. The Mad, Mad, Mad World of Climatism on climate and energy. Then I wrote Outside the Green Box, Rethinking Sustainable Development, which talks about overpopulation and resource depletion and global pollution and climate. And then the last one is Green Breakdown, that talks about the energy transition. So they're really they cover different topics, and as you say, they're a lot of fun to read. There's a cartoon at the front of each chapter for the last 3 books talks about the craziness in climate and energy.
Well, again, let me encourage everyone to learn more, to read these books, to visit, and if there are episodes in our podcast series you haven't seen, this has really, really been a wonderful thing to put together, and I think a worthwhile way to spend some time. Share the movie with your friends and family. If you've got kids in school, see if you can arrange to have the movie shown to children. This is an incredibly important message for them to get, and the movie is so wonderfully well done. It's got a smile on its face and introduces a difficult topic and does it in a way that is, it's a joy to watch it. And when you're done, you will feel more optimistic and hopeful about our culture and our society, our future, and human flourishing generally. Steve, you've been a wonderful guest. I'm very grateful that you've been with us today.
Thank you, Dave, Kim, and Walt, and keep up your great work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to insert also, if you refer to our Lord Monckton podcast, you will discover that it will take hundreds of years to get enough rare earths to make these equipment.
Yep.
Well, it's an excellent point. And Walt, this vision from your kitchen table to where we are now is making a difference. And it's bringing truth and light to this narrative, these questions. And Steve, this has been a delight. And I've got to get your books, that's for sure. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Dave, as always, great job.